This one comes from Rotor Todd Footy, and I think this one's going to be a bit of a longer debate, and it's a pretty juicy topic that will be pretty controversial. Got two former TFC beat reporters here who are going to be shed some good insight in it. But the question is that the bad TFC years were more fun than the good championship TFC years.
Well, I was only around for the good, so I'm going to let Kurt go first on this one.
All right. So I actually answered this question yesterday on Twitter because I do genuinely believe that there is a significant number of TFC fans out there who actually miss the bad years. It's similar to if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you don't want to admit it, but you kind of like the fact that your team's had about 30 quarterbacks in the last 15 years and you can complain about it. People like to complain, and they'd rather be terrible than slightly above average. So what I said was, the 2019 TFC, wasn't all that entertaining for me. I don't know. The 2017 TFC, which was the best team of all time, that was thrilling. That was amazing. But when I look back at my coverage of TFC, some of the most memorable moments were the bad years. When the stadium emptied out early, when they lost 6-2 to Philadelphia at home, when Danny Kuvermans called them the worst team in the world, when they lost a record, 9 straight to start one of the seasons. Those were the moments that I remember and I recall, and I think a lot of TFC fans, believe it or not, look back on those times rather fondly.
I think, certainly from a journalist standpoint, it can be much more interesting to cover a bad team than a good, stable one. Like as Kurt said, when it gets to being the best team ever, then there's obviously, there's a certain thrill to that. But a lot of the time, bad teams can be more interesting. And I would also say more generally that I think fans who have been through the bads tend to appreciate the good a little bit more. And so, having some bad years does serve its purpose of making you more grateful for when good teams come around.
So you weren't necessarily on the beat, but you're a massive MLS fan and have been for a while. So what's your take on this?
Well, he says more fun. I can't imagine those years being more fun than 2017. I remember being at that game at BMO Field to the final and looking to my left, just a couple people down, and there's this grown man bawling, crying, and sobbing through his story of how he's been a season ticket holder since day one. I can't imagine him saying that he had more fun in those early years than 2017.
I do think it's.
I can tell you this. Let me
because of those lows.
Let me add this. Let me add this. TFC in 2012 actually had more media coverage, more mainstream media coverage than TFC now. Because as soon as Danny Kuverman said that we're the worst team in the world, everybody was out there the next day because they wanted to get an interview for them to explain themselves because it was an absolute train wreck. So I think fans were having fun back then too. You have fun making fun of your team. It's part of your identity. It's part of your identity.
There is something to be said about being so bad that it's almost a joke. Whereas there's the purgatory too of making the playoffs, having promise, and then being a first round exit every single year. So there's something to be said there. Okay, one question from the chat before we wrap it up and say goodbye comes from Blake. And Blake says, a domestic berth for CONCACAF Champions League should go to a team that plays in a top domestic league, not a foreign one. I'm seeing nods. Not necessarily a hot take, but
we're talking about
take maybe.
We're talking about Canada, I assume here, and the fact that the Canadian Championship is our route into the CONCACAF Champions League.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough one. Like for me,
it's not tough.
I think I know what Kurt's answer is going to be here. In the long term, yes, I would like to see this as a goal, and I would probably prefer to see the Canadian teams have a shot of qualifying through MLS. Not that I expect that to happen. As of right now, I do think that the Canadian Championship is the one tournament in which all of Canada's teams come together and compete, and so that is our legitimate route into the CONCACAF Champions League.
Kurt, why do you disagree?
It makes sense to me.
Sorry, go ahead, Ace.
No, the current format makes sense to me, but you'd like to see maybe in 4 or 5 years things change and the CPL obviously improve its level of play to a point where, the winner should move on.
4 or 5 years. I'd like to see this change next year, ASAP. Now then, I know nothing can change until an MLS team in Canada can qualify through somewhere other than the Voyager Cup, right? And unfortunately, right now, Toronto FC, the Montreal Impact, the Vancouver Whitecaps, their only way into international competition is through the Canadian Championship. Interestingly enough, Don Garber, during his last State of the League in Seattle, ahead of the previous MLS Cup, mentioned that he was open to the possibility of a Canadian MLS team if they win MLS Cup, being granted a position in the Champions League. I think it's going to be a hard sell because U.S. soccer is going to want to support as many U.S. markets as possible. But yeah, of course, it's insane. Canada's top tier. If you win the top tier, you should qualify for the Champions League.
Yeah,
it's a good spot.
If we can, persuade US soccer to let Canadian teams qualify through MLS, then 100%. But is that going to happen?
It's not going to happen, and the only reason it would happen is if you had a situation where, like Toronto FC did in 2017, Toronto FC wins MLS Cup. They don't win the Voyager Cup in the same year, and therefore are left out of the CONCACAF Champions League. That's the only reason that it would happen.
And I think US soccer would rather just make exceptions on a case-by-case basis than fundamentally change the Canadian-US balance. For me, if something like that did happen, I think they just make a one-off exception. So that's why I don't really see it changing.